Right, good morning, folks. Welcome. I'm a great believer in serendipity, and my interest in spies really came about because I discovered a postcard on eBay, which was this one. Now, you might think, what's that got to do with spies? And the answer would be nothing. On the back of it, however, is a very interesting message. It's a card written on the it was posted on the 21st of August 1914, just a couple of weeks after the First World War was declared, or before, when Britain declared war on Germany. And it's written by a young lad who was 16 years old at the time, called William, writing home to his mother, Lily, in West Croydon. And he was telling her that on a trip he made to Ashford via Dover, he'd been stopped as a spy 17 times and searched once. The paranoia that existed in Britain just after war was declared was incredible, and spies were everywhere. And this poor lad was stopped 17 times. He had a rather unfortunate life, bless him, because he enlisted in the army 2 years later in the 20th Battalion London Regiment as a drummer, but was killed in action on the 28th of July 1916, and he's buried just outside Arras in France. So rather sad story, but this is what prompted my interest in spies. When Britain's Secret Service was created just before the Great War, its head was Sir Mansfield Cumming, and he was usually known as C. And it was based on this character, or this person, that Ian Fleming based his character M in his James Bond series of books. And just to go back a second to this blue plaque here is in Whitehall Court in London, and there are only two other blue plaques in London that relate to spies. One is for Violet Sabo, I'll talk about her in a minute, and one for a guy called Yeo Thomas, whose nickname or spy name, if you like, was White Rabbit. And Commander Cummings had to rely initially on willing amateurs, like serving officers on leave to act as agents. And one such guy was Lieutenant Stewart, who was an old Etonian and a solicitor, who was based in Tunbridge Wells with the West Kent Yeomanry. He was arrested in 1911, accused of spying by the Germans, and sent to Leipzig for trial. And he was sentenced to a prison sentence in Glatz, which was a fortress prison. However, to his surprise, and to the British government's surprise, he and two other officers, Captain Trench and a Lieutenant Brandon from the Navy, were released because the Kaiser had allowed his daughter, Victoria Louise, to marry the Duke of Cumberland. And as a kind of gift to Britain, he let these guys go free. And here's a postcard showing Captain Trench, or Lieutenant Trench, as he was then, arriving in Britain, having been released from prison. It's quite an unusual card. They spelt Captain Trench's name wrong. They put Captain French, but that's a bit of sort of poetic license there, I think. The card was actually produced by a Paul Hoffman. I don't know when he lived or died, but what I do know is that he was one of the official reporters, photography-wise, during the Great War. It's a postcard here of British soldiers looking for German spies in a proverbial haystack. The British had a much greater pool of people to draw from to become spies. They obviously had the whole population of France and Belgium to draw from, whereas the Germans only had a very limited pool from which to actually draw their spies from. And this was just an unusual card to find, I think. Because of its location, it's a postcard of Folkestone Harbour, Folkestone was an ideal target for German spies, and it was a hotbed of espionage during World War One, and security was extremely tight. Now, you can see the top of the card here. There's a very striking building. If I zoom in a little bit here, this was actually the German consulate, which overlooked Folkestone Harbour with a panoramic view of the harbour. So they could see all the comings and goings of all the vessels and things. The British government thought this was a bit daft. So we sent the troops in and we closed the consulate down. Folkestone as a town became the head of a tripartite intelligence bureau with the British, French and Belgian intelligence offices working together. And they were based in this building here on the promenade. And it was from here that the British controlled two major spy rings, one in Rotterdam in the neutral Netherlands and one in France. Now I need to introduce you to a very striking lady. This is a postcard of a statue just outside Lille, and it shows a soldier kissing the hand of a woman who probably ran the largest spy network of the Great War, Louise de Bettigny. She was a very striking lady. She came from an aristocratic family, but they were hard up. But she was very modern and cultivated. She could speak English, German and Italian fluently, and to a lesser extent, Russian, Czech and Spanish. So she really puts me to shame. After the invasion of Lille by the Germans in October 1914, Louise fled to Saint-Omer, where she helped to care for the wounded. And it was while she was here that she was enrolled in the British Secret Service under the pseudonym Alice Dubois. And she was soon joined by another woman. And they formed a network called the Alice Network, named after her pseudonym. And it was based in Lille originally, but then it was expanded to cover Valenciennes, Cambrai and St. Quentin. And she enlisted over 80 agents in the region of Lille, which was an important logistics hub for the German army. But she controlled 80 agents, this young girl, very young. And she would monitor gun batteries, transport, munitions depots, and she also helped Allied soldiers escape to Holland, which was then a neutral country. One of her last messages that she actually sent before she was arrested announced the preparation of a massive German attack on Verdun in early 1916. And the information that she provided was relayed to the French commander, who refused to believe it. I think he rued that day. She was, however, arrested and imprisoned in Saint-Gilles prison in Lille, which was constructed to resemble a sort of medieval fortress. At the time of her sentencing, there was an international campaign in full swing to protest against the execution of the British nurse Edith Cavell and the Belgian resistant Gabrielle Petit. And bending to the pressure from the public and from other countries, the German general who was in charge of Belgium committed her sentence to life imprisonment rather than to be shot. But she was held in dreadful conditions, which worsened after she was discovered inciting her co-detainees to stop working for their captors, and she soon fell ill with pleurisy. But she was refused treatment by the Germans, and she died, aged 28. There's a wooden cross actually that marked her original grave that's actually preserved in the Basilica at Notre Dame de Lorette. It's been there since 1994. There's only one stamp been produced to celebrate this lady's life. And the fact that she was Belgian and it's a French stamp always strikes me as being a bit odd. Would have thought Belgium would have produced their own stamp, really. We mentioned Gabrielle Petit before. She was born in 1893, joined the Belgian Red Cross. And when she was traveling on a train from Netherlands to Britain, she was recruited on board the ship across the Channel by an agent working for the Wallinger Bureau. This goes back to the Folkestone link. She received training in London and she crossed back into occupied Belgium in 1915. And her job was to look for activity that could be useful for the Allies. So troop movements, for example. And here you have a big contingent of medical staff moving through Brussels. So this would have been ideal stuff for her to report back to the Germans. This rather tragic sort of picture here, this shows the Tier National Shooting Range. This is a postcard in Brussels, and it was where condemned prisoners and civilians were shot. And the guy in the picture used to be the director of the shooting range. And the stool in the foreground there is where you were sat on before you were shot. Her funeral, which was in 1919 when her body was exhumed, was attended by the Queen of Belgium. So she was quite famous in her own time. And there's actually a statue to her in Brussels. Probably, and this picture was probably taken just before it was erected in or just after it was erected in 1923. And on the pedestal, there's an inscription that says, "Long live Belgium." And she actually said at the time of her death, when she was being shot, I'll show you how a Belgian woman knows how to die. It's rather poignant, really. From the outset of World War I, the German army meted out really brutal punishments to anybody involved in spying. And as a kind of aside, because spies often would communicate using carrier pigeons, in Belgium during the First World War, if you were caught by the Germans with pigeons in your loft, you were shot. You weren't tried, you were just shot, because pigeons were not the thing to keep. One of the more celebrated victims of the Germans' wrath against spies was a young student by the name of Leon Trulin. And he set up a small network called Leon 143 to pass information to the Alice network, which goes back to Louise de Bettigny. This young lad was born in 1899, but he wanted to join the resistance effort, and he was recruited. And this is a rather unusual stamp. It's the only stamp I can find of this chap Trulin, and it's showing him standing against the wall just before he was executed. His little group of spies were very young. There was a guy called Raymond, he was 18, Marcel was 15, Andre was 18, Marcel was 17, Lucien was 18. So they were all very young heroes, really. I mean, a tremendous sense of character and strength these people had. And this guy, Leon, was shot when he was 18. This is a copy of the notice that was put in the local paper by the government, by the governor, the same guy we saw the picture of before. And it says, the Belgian student Leon Trulin, who was sentenced to death by field court for treason through espionage, was shot today. As a warning, this is brought to the public's knowledge. Not a very nice statement. And here's a statue to him that was erected in 1934. And poignantly, at the bottom of the statue, it says, "I forgive everyone, friend and foe. I show them mercy because of the mercy they have not shown me." And this guy was posthumously awarded the British War Medal in 1920 and he became, and he was made a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire, which is quite unusual for a foreigner to be given that recognition. Violet Sabo, it's not quite we're not quite clear how she came into contact with the French SOE, but she was probably recommended by another agent. Very young lassie. You might say, what's it got to do with stamps? Well, there was a very nice book, little booklet produced, and the sad thing is with these books of stamps is that they often have these things printed on them, but probably nobody ever reads them, which is rather sad. This lassie was dropped by parachute in 1943, just southeast of Limoges. She was captured by the Germans and sent to Paris. She was sent to the concentration camp in Ravensbrück when she was aged 23, where she died. The sad thing was that she'd actually married a guy in 1940, member of the French Foreign Legion, and they had a child called Tanya, and Tanya was awarded her mother's George Cross and the French Croix de Guerre in a rather poignant ceremony in 1947. Only in the last 7 years or so, in the year 2015, Tanya sold her mother's medals because she had no children of her own to hand them down to, and she sold them, and they were sold in 2015 for £260,000. And there she's proudly displaying her mother's medals. Enzo Serini was a chap born in Rome. His father was physician to the King of Italy, and he grew up in a traditional Jewish Italian household and became a Zionist as a teenager and was one of the first Italian Zionists. During World War II, he joined the British Army and was involved in disseminating anti-fascist propaganda in Egypt. And the British sent him to Iraq, and he spent part of his time there organising clandestine risings against the Germans. In 1942, he was sent to Iraq. And there's a nice Cinderella here showing his face. This was produced by the Jewish National Fund in 1946. This was a fund created in about 1902, 1903 to buy parcels of land in what was then Ottoman Palestine for Jewish people to buy. He was he helped organize the Jewish parachute unit of the British Special Operations, the SOE, and sent agents into occupied Europe. In May 1944, he was parachuted into northern Italy, but was captured. And according to the records, he was sent to a Dachau concentration camp and shot in November 1944. Another similar character, one of 32 parachutists sent by the Jewish Agency and British SOE operations, was a woman. She went to Slovakia in the autumn of 1944 and worked with local Jewish people to resist the German occupation there. She established a camp for Russian prisoners of war who had escaped and helped organize a Jewish resistance unit. The Germans organized a force specifically to find them and to find her particularly. And in November 1944, she and the parachutists that were sent with her were captured. They were actually captured by Ukrainian Nazi collaborators, straight enough, in the SS, and they were killed and buried in a mass grave. There's also another Cinderella here with her picture on. And after the war, her body was exhumed and buried in the military cemetery in Prague. And then her remains were then removed again in 1952, and she's now buried in the Mount Herzl military cemetery in Jerusalem. That's another card there, a first day cover of her there. the whole of Latin America was a hotbed for spies and agents from both sides during World War II. And in fact, Cuba actually declared war on the Axis powers in December 41. And there's a nice set of stamps here from Cuba with a whisper, beware of the fifth column. And of particular interest in Cuba was a Russian spy called Heinz Luning, and he proved to be totally incompetent. He was finally picked up and shot in 1942. And the hapless fictional character, Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene, is reputedly based on this guy's life. I have to tell you now that Cuba is a great holiday destination. I have to tell you that because my daughter-in-law is Cuban. And that's the end of my very short presentation. Just don't tell anybody. Thank you.